This is Creepy and Geeky, a part of the Morbidly Beautiful Podcast Network. Welcome to Creepy and Geeky. I'm your host, Robert, and today is part 4 in my Saw series. Joining me today for this look at Saw, the final chapter, and Jigsaw is Kat Hughes. Kat is a freelance film critic who writes for THN, Ghouls Magazine, Film Stories, and Film Hounds, and she's the host of the new podcast, Movies with Mummy, where she talks kids' movies with her daughter, Aurora. Welcome back to the show, Kat.
Thank you for having me. I'm ready to play a game and ready to do this.
All right. Yeah. So we actually we're kind of on these two movies are kind of a weird, like it's a weird double bill, not because they're not connected, because as we all know, all the Saw movies are connected. And, but one is the end of the original saga of sorts. And, and Jigsaw itself is kind of this weird extra continuation of the storyline that really doesn't go anywhere past this one movie. So at least not yet. So it's been an interesting journey so far.
Yeah, they are. They are interesting to pair together. But as you said, I think everything in the Saw franchise, it all threads its way neatly into one another. I know plenty of franchises that try to sort of redact and like recut and retell the lore, like, oh no, that thing you thought happened didn't happen. But Saw always makes sense. It doesn't quite do that. You think it's doing that, and then when you actually sort of get the whiteboard out and like the push pins and stuff, it's like, oh no, actually this does all make a horrible amount of sense, despite it being written by X amount of people across however many years. They always find like, oh, there's a little gap there in that timeline, let's just like slot this thing in, and it always manages to work. It's ridiculous.
Exactly. And we're even getting that with the new movie Saw X that's coming out that fits between Saw 1 and Saw 2. So it's like, okay, well, now we got even more of a gap to fit this one movie into, so that it'll be interesting to see how they work that into.
I mean, I did watch. Yeah, I did watch. Obviously, for prep for this, I sort of went back through the series, and in 6, I believe there's a conversation that opens up the potential for the timeline for 10.
Oh yeah.
Like when they initially announced it was going to be between 1 and 2, it's like, oh my god, what are they doing? And then rewatching 6, so I was like, oh, actually, maybe it could slot in there. So I'm definitely intrigued to see X, and if that maybe is the space where it's going to insert itself.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it should be fairly interesting. I'm excited to see it now that I've got caught up on all of these. I still have to rewatch Spiral one more time for the show, of course, and then just also for myself before I jump back into John Kramer fully. But with these two movies, we've got Saw, the final chapter. We'll go ahead and jump into that one. And this one is the end of the original set of movies. When Saw came out in 2004, they quickly, like every year on like basically every year moving forward for the next 6 years afterward, they put out a new Saw movie. They kept a fairly tight continuity, especially for a series that was not intended to actually go past the first movie. So it's wild how much they were able to fit all that in and make it make sense along the way.
Yeah, I mean, horror franchises aren't known for their continuity. I mean, you think about this is the 7th film, and it still directly interconnects with the first film, and it's not a one-off. It's not like a Dream Warriors scenario where, oh look, suddenly Nancy's back, and New Nightmare, oh
Right.
look, she's, now the actress who plays Nancy is in it. There is a solid through line. It hasn't gone down. I mean, like Halloween or Friday the 13th, their lore was reinvented pretty much every film, it felt like. So
Right.
for this one to stick so closely to the John Kramer story is, I think it's really unique in terms of a horror franchise.
Right. And they do kind of end it at this point. At the end of this movie, it's kind of feels like, okay, well, they've completed it. It's all done. There's nothing else that can come afterward. And yet, as we found out, that there is a couple more stories to tell later on down the road. But but at this point, we've been we've gotten all of John Kramer's story and a lot more of his backstory by this point, that filled in all the potential gaps in what we knew about him up to this point. And then plus we get more with Jill Tuck, we get more with Hoffman, and then we get the surprise return of Dr. Gordon, which was a great moment to come back round on, uh, from the first movie.
Yeah, because we've not seen him at all since.
At
There's
all. Yeah.
been no mention like that. We visited the bathroom plenty of times in the series, but it's always just been like his decaying foot and
Right.
Adam's corpse. There's never been really much mention of Gordon, because even when they have spoken of Gordon, it's been in the flashback scenes in a time pre-trial. So
Yeah.
it's been that thread of, well, he kind of passed the test because he sawed his leg off and he left, and it's been that question of what happened when he got out of that room, because we know that he got out and that Adam didn't, and the opening title sort of filling in that gap and seeing him sort of crawl down, and then he
Yeah.
said obviously he's a doctor, so he knows he's got to like cauterize the wound and stuff. I thought it was a really exciting way to kickstart what was originally going to be the final chapter, because it's like, oh, that
Right.
guy, the guy from the film that everybody sort of loved, he's back. Like, where is this going? It was very exciting to see him back.
Oh yeah, definitely, absolutely. It's and it is interesting that they had every movie, kind of filled in the gaps of pretty much everybody else, and we never heard about Dr. Gordon except for very lightly, after number one. And so it was a very weird, odd omission, especially with the fact that he did crawl away. And you were to assume either he did get away or that Jigsaw killed him, after he got up and walked out and left Adam there in the bathroom. But without any firm confirmation, it's like, okay, so what really happened? And so it was nice to, with that beginning sequence, like you said, to finally get that resolution of his story, and discover, just at least in part, that he had survived and had potentially gotten out. You find out just a little bit later into the movie, yes, he did get out. He's alive. He's well again, and presumably still a doctor, but might not be. But this one's interesting too, because this one introduces that the character Bobby Dagan, who is a who bills himself as a survivor of one of Jigsaw's traps. And because there are other survivors. We have the woman who had to chop off her arm in, was that number 5? And she so we've been able to find a couple other survivors in there. And so it was nice to see some of these other ones, because there were some from, I think number 6 were in there as well, in this group meeting, like a survivors group. And that's where we see Dr. Gordon again, with this group being led by Bobby Dagan. So it was kind of cool to see these extra survivors and see that, yes, not everybody has died and not everybody is turned to, Jigsaw's clutches like Amanda had.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing because I think you forget how many people do technically survive some of these traps because you're right. There's a lot of people from six. There's like the secretary who
Yes,
was spared and things. She thinks she's in there, and I can't remember her character
I
name,
think.
but Tanidra, the one with the who chopped off her arm. Um, it is interesting to see these people, and it makes sense that they would form a support group, but it is important that it does highlight that Jigsaw wasn't doing these trials to recruit people to his cause. He
Right.
just
Yeah.
wanted them to live better. But then I also think it's quite interesting that like within that group you have got people like Tanidra's character being like, what am I supposed to learn from this? Like, I've got no arm. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. How am I supposed to appreciate my life after this when
yeah,
I'm,
like I get,
you
I
know,
get, I shouldn't have like been giving people like massive loans and getting them in debt and stuff. But how does me not having an arm teach me not to do that again? It's
right. Yeah. It's, yeah, no, I think it's interesting to have, some outside, like for some different perspectives on that for sure. Cause you don't want to have everybody just be like, oh my God, yes, it changed my life and made me appreciate my life better. And like the way that, Bobby Dagan is, he's trying to present himself as this guy who was a survivor, and it changed his life and made him want to be a better person, and help to teach other people like that. And it was good to see other people who were just like, I'm just glad I survived.
yeah,
And and I took nothing else away from this other than I hate Jigsaw and I'm glad he's dead.
yeah. And there's some wild traps teased within that as well. There's that one woman who is sharing in the group, and her trial was like to hang from a pole with a load of fans underneath them
Yes.
until like the other guy fell. It's like that's a very different trap to what we've seen. It's almost comedic in a way
Yeah.
because it's just like so absurd. Like, how was either one of them supposed to like survive hanging there?
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, for sure. There's definitely there's some odd traps in this one that I've seen some other discussion on it that people didn't really like this one, that it felt rushed, and that that the traps were kind of weak. And I'll agree that the traps weren't the greatest in certain things, but they don't always have to be. They don't always have to be super elaborate and crazy and everything. It's more about, what it's taking from the people, um,
Yeah, I think the issue with this one is that the traps are on screen for too long.
mhm.
Especially like the whisper one. It's just a lot of this woman screaming, which considering
Yeah,
the trap is supposed to like kick up a notch if they make a noise louder than a
above a
whisper.
whisper.
It's
Yeah.
yeah, it feels like that one goes on for slightly too long.
Yeah,
And
I'll agree with that. Yeah.
um I think a couple of the other ones. But this is obviously the I think it's the only one that was also in 3D because it was around the time of the
Yes.
boom, and saw, although it had the Halloween crown for a number of years, Paranormal Activity came out and kind of stole its thunder, which is one of the reasons why they decided to retire the series for a while, was because they knew they couldn't compete with that. So they kind of brought in the 3D as a gimmick that Paranormal Activity didn't have to bring people in. And so I think some of the traps are obviously designed with that 3D element
Right.
in mind, which whenever there's 3D in a horror film, it's always a bit cheap. It's always stuff suddenly like coming out to poke you in the eye and stuff. It's a fun night at the cinema, but I
Yeah.
kind of feel that they were focusing more on that aspect than let's make some really good traps. But saying that, I love like the lovers quarrel sort of opening in the middle of town, and it's like the two
Yes.
guys and the I
I liked
really
it was very public instead of just being hidden like they normally are. I thought that
yeah
was a great opening because it was so public, and it was just like, putting all their dirty laundry out there and everything, and just having people freaking out about it. It was that part was great for sure.
Yeah, but there's people freaking out, and then there's also people just like filming it and stuff, because that's what
Yeah,
happens whenever anything happens in the world.
true.
There's the people that stand there recording it. So it was a nice sort of bit of social commentary. But I love how it plays out. I love that the guys are just like, you know what? Is she worth this? Because she's like, oh yeah,
Right.
kill him. And then the other one gets the upper hand, and she's like, no, I didn't mean it when I just said that I loved him. I had to say that. No, and I just kind of, I feel that this one is where the franchise really starts to embrace its humor more,
Right.
and like in
This,
that
yeah.
trap itself, when they're just like, shall we stop, mate? And they're like, yeah, all right. And then their girlfriend is, like sawn in half.
Right.
It is, it's nice humor. And then you've got the um Gibson character, who is like straight out of like a Lethal Weapon film or something. He's like wisecracking here, there, and everywhere. This
Yeah.
one did seem to be going for that fun factor coupled with the 3D. It was going for like, we're going to give you laughs, we're going to give you thrills and spills with this one.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's interesting too because I don't think I saw any of the Saw movies in the theater. No, I didn't see any of them. The only one that I've seen so far in the theater was Spiral. Um, because I came to all these pretty late. Um, I think I'd seen the first one on DVD not too long after it came out on DVD, but beyond that, I was just like, okay, they're interesting. That I'm not a huge fan, but they're interesting. But then later on, I uh, jumped in and watched all of them up to seven and enjoyed them. I thought they were all pretty good. And this one, this one was interesting because I didn't see it in 3D. And while watching it, especially this time, there were moments where I could sit there and go, okay, well, 3D would have worked, I guess, in this moment, but there was nothing that really jumped out as being really super made for 3D. And of course, obviously there were a couple of moments where things were like poking out, where they were going to poke into an eye or something like that. But it's just still was like, maybe it was better in the theater with the actual 3D, but this one just didn't scream like that to me. And whenever I see a horror movie that's in 3D, that's what I want. Like I know it's cheesy and everything like that, but I think that's what makes 3D fun is that it is that gimmick to poke things out at you at the audience rather than immersing you in things. I don't really care about the immersion aspect. That's neat, but that's not what I'm wanting to see with 3D. 3D, I want stuff flying at my face. um
Yeah,
so
yeah.
this one just didn't feel like that compared to something like My Bloody Valentine in 3D, or even the terrible Final Destination movie that was in 3D. Um, at least those had stuff flying at your face, and that's what felt like this was lacking in that way. That even whenever I'm watching one of those other movies in 2D, it's still stuff flying at you and trying to do that. Whereas this one just did not feel like that at all.
No, this one very much was like blood splatter was
Yeah.
sort of appeared to be like coming at you, which, yeah, watching it just in a home environment without the 3D is just, oh look, there's some blood flying around. It doesn't, you're
Right.
right, it's not like Jason Voorhees with a pitchfork, coming out of the screen at you, or the pickaxe from My Bloody Valentine 3D. It's definitely muted on those 3D aspects. But I mean, for me, like Saw was my franchise. As much as I was a teenager during the Scream era, I was a couple of years too young to see any of those in theaters. But
Right.
Saw was the franchise where I got to see all of them in the theater. Although I didn't go to see two in the theater because my boyfriend at the time wasn't really a fan of the first one, so he didn't want to come to the second one. But from three onwards, it was like a Halloween tradition for me and my mum to go and watch the latest Saw film together, which was so much fun to be able to do that. And what I would do in the lead up to each film is I would watch one film a night. So by the time I got to Saw 3D, I basically had a week of Saw, which was a great week. Settled down on like the Sunday with Saw, and then the Saturday I was in the cinema watching Saw 3D. It was a great week.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Yeah, no, it if you can do these, like if you watch this original seven, you just watch them like one a day. It's a great week. It's a great the way to watch them if you don't want to binge like more than one at a time. And you just kind of pace them out that way. It makes for a good overall story. And it is a lot of fun. And I like how yes, it gets convoluted and crazy because of all the twistiness of the timeline and everything. But that's, I think, one of the major appeals for it, at least for me, is just like, well, where does all this fit? Like, how does it all work? And you can, sit down and figure it out. And I know people have, and you can plot it out and say, you know what, this actually all works together really well.
It does. I mean, and I would recommend to people who are planning a series rewatch before like watching Saw 10 and stuff, maybe do stick to like one a day, because I watched 5 in total yesterday.
Yeah.
4 of them literally back to back. Each one was 90 minutes. I had 6 hours while my daughter was at school, and I was like, right, I'm going to do this. And although I didn't get fatigued as I do with like binge watching like some other franchises that I've done in the past,
Yeah.
it does get very confusing. Like a couple of hours later, like when my husband was watching Jigsaw with me and he mentioned something, I was trying to explain like, and no, this works because blah, 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 blah. And 4 through 7 had all become sort of like muddled in my brain, and I couldn't
Yeah.
remember
They
like
all
what
blend
trap.
together.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
couldn't remember what trap came from what film, because the timeline is so interconnected, and it makes sense when you watch it, but watching them that close together, it's like, I know it makes sense, but I can't unpick quite how it makes sense now. So yeah, like ration yourself to like 1, maybe 2 a day, because otherwise it's wild. I mean, the fact that I didn't have like insane dreams last night, I don't know how I managed to do that because five Saw films in a day it's a lot.
That is a lot for sure. Yeah, no, it's yeah, if when I was originally like I just recorded um the first 2 episodes for this series the other day, and trying to keep track of what was what in each of the conversations without being, obviously this podcast isn't, spoiler free, so I don't ever worry about that, but just trying to keep track of where things were at so that I could remark about the right things was like, it was very difficult at times because at that point I'd watched up to number 6. And so it was just like, okay, wait, what happens where? And so I did have to talk about things that were in 5 and 6, because it was like, okay, well, things that are come later kind of inform what happens now. And so it's yeah, it does get very muddled when you watch them kind of back to back like that, and you're trying to talk about them all. So, but I mean, that's part of the fun.
Yeah,
Uh,
definitely.
but yeah, it's a this movie, like I said, this movie is the final movie of the original storyline. Like you said, they stopped it because of paranormal activity, and probably other stuff that was coming up at the time that was kind of taken away from it and kind of given more stuff. Because I mean, by the seventh installment, no matter how good it is, people are going to still be kind of like, oh my god, another Saw movie.
Yeah,
And so it's kind of better to space things out rather than doing them year by year by year. Usually give it a couple of years between, I've always found, is like the better way of doing it, so you're not getting too much fatigue on that. I think that's kind of what people are experiencing now with the Marvel movies. As much as I enjoy the Marvel movies and I have no problem with them because they are so different between each one of them, that I think most people are just like, oh my god, another one. So
yeah,
I understand it from that perspective, again, because you're watching these every year and you're just like, okay, I can't invest in that much every year.
yeah.
But
I yeah, I think what Marvel did wrong is they then started flooding TV series out as well. So it wasn't
yeah,
just I go and watch like a couple of films each year. It's also now before I do that, I've got to watch this series because there's this character who's going to become a main character in this. I think that's really what kicked in that fatigue. But yeah,
right.
Thor every year, as much as it was, it was a nice tradition for me. I completely get. Okay, there's some fireworks going off.
Yeah.
Can you hear them?
What was it?
There's some fireworks going off. Can you hear them?
Oh no, I didn't hear it. No.
Okay, that's fine. I'll continue. Um, yeah, as much as like it was a celebration for me, I completely understand like fatigue
Yeah.
coming in because it's like, but just, I mean, the fact that all 10 of these films are releasing in the cinema is again, it's not seen too often within a horror
No.
franchise. There's obviously some testament of quality to this series that means that Lionsgate keep getting it into cinemas. I mean, look at poor Hellraiser. That got what, like maybe 3, 4 films into the theaters before they all went DTV. I think it was even fewer for something like Leprechaun. So the fact that all of these are in the cinema is it's just a testament to the quality of the series.
Yeah, definitely. I I I agree with that. I think that there's not very many. I mean, I think all the Nightmare on Elm Street movies made it to theaters. Um, all I think all the Jason movies, all the Friday the 13th movies made it to theaters, maybe just barely. With Jason X. But it's I think most horror franchises don't typically get that. You look at like Child's Play. I don't think the last two movies even made it to theaters. They were direct to
No.
video. Um, and it's just it's nice when it's nice with this franchise that their quality is always there too. They're not even though they're inexpensive, they're not cheap. They never look cheap. And that's what's nice. That's what's been nice about it. And I think overall the stories have been generally pretty good across the franchise. So um but yeah, I like this one. I like how it ties everything up by the end. I'm there's one thing I am disappointed in. It's the whole Jill Tuck storyline. I It kind of feels like she was being built up to be bigger, and then they decided against it at the end. So that was kind of disappointing because I kind of felt like she was a good um because people talk about Hoffman and Amanda and Gordon being these disciples of John Kramer, but Jill was there along with him the whole time. And like I felt like she was kind of the better heir, and that she didn't really get her due as much as she probably should have.
Yeah, for me, I think both Hoffman and Jill in Seven kind of get a bit of a disservice. It almost becomes a little bit slasher movie with him
Yeah,
just spending the film chasing her and her like
yeah,
running
yeah,
away, being a bit of a damsel. And I think that what the franchise has built up until that point is that Jill isn't a damsel. She works at this clinic with some really unsavory characters, and she has, I think, John even says to her, why are you working here with these people? What is it about these people? And she has got that gumption to stick and say that no, I want to help these people, and she can hold her own with them. And even when John turns, she isn't as disturbed as you would
yeah. As
expect
you would think, yeah,
as somebody to be. And I think she can see where he is coming from, and she understands it obviously when she's presented with Amanda as, look, it works, and Amanda's like,
yeah,
yeah, I'm completely changed. I think she comes around to the idea, and then you know because she's obviously been around like Hoffman and people during these bits because they're all aware of her and her knowledge and
Yeah.
stuff. So for them to have be like, oh no, Hoffman's coming to get me, it doesn't feel quite like
Yeah.
the character that we've come to know. And it kind of feels like there was maybe more story, but when they decided to end it, they were like, well, what do we do with Jill? And it just
Yeah.
became well, let's just bundle her off.
Yeah, that's what it felt like to me too. Like it's just like there was probably potential storylines that they were going to do, but then because they wanted to take a break from it, they were just like, okay, well, we can't leave it hanging and not do something for a few years. We got to, cut it short and just make it. But at the same time, it's just weirdly frustrating because at that moment where Hoffman and Jill die, then they present Gordon as like another secret, disciple of Jigsaw, and that you know that seems like okay. Well, now is he going to be going off and doing his like? Are we getting more movies with him now as the main killer? And so it's like, what does this mean? And then it goes nowhere. So it's just like, what are you guys doing?
I was so excited when the pig mask was taken off and it was Gordon
Me
underneath.
too.
It made so much sense. And then suddenly, because I was talking on a pod on the pod on the pendulum about Saw 2, and one of the things came up was that John's apparently a surgeon now because he can just like insert a key in like behind
Yeah.
somebody's eye. Like, wow, there's no end to this man's talents. But then suddenly it makes sense because he's had a surgeon on staff, so he's been
Yep.
there doing the key. He's been like sewing people's mouths up and stuff, and I guess also helping out those like Denedra's character who survived the trap minus
Yeah.
minus an arm. He's there to offer that sort of first aid triage um, in some capacity. And it just made beautiful sense. And I actually met Carrie at a convention a couple of years after. And because
Oh
he's
yeah.
not alone, he's got two other people
Yeah.
with him.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
that's like, I remember like
There's
saying, like, because it always bugged my mum. My mum hates an open ending. She likes her films to be like pretty closed off. She hates an ambiguous ending.
yeah.
And that always really bothered her that she didn't know. And so I was talking to him and I was saying, you're probably not allowed to like say or anything, which is completely understandable, but who's under the hoods? And what he said was that it was the two guys from the Lovers Quarrel Trap.
Oh, interesting. I
Yeah, it was
like
supposed to
that.
be like after that trap, they were then sort of recruited by Gordon to be like his like second and third, and that a future story would have centered on those three a bit more, which obviously
Yeah.
eventually when they came to do Jigsaw, they decided not to go with that. But I thought that was quite interesting that they did have a plan for the identities of whose those people were.
Yeah. That's disappointing because that is I do get frustrated with like leaving something open like that. And maybe it's something they'll come back to, but if they don't come back to it soon, I feel like they're just kind of leaving it on the floor. And I don't know. I just feel like that would be a really good continuation, more so than like I like Spiral. Don't get me wrong, but and I know a lot of people don't, but I like Spiral. But I think that would have been a better story to continue on than Spiral was in that circumstance.
Yeah, because I feel like I don't feel like Gordon was necessarily like 100% involved in like the
Right.
trials and stuff. I very much feel that he was kind of the on-call
He was,
surgeon for like, I need you for this. And he was also like Jill's guardian.
yeah,
We see the thing
exactly.
where like John's like, if anything ever happens to Jill, it's like he's like a sleeper agent,
Yeah.
Jigsaw. Like he will be activated in this scenario. And obviously his mission is to kill off Hoffman, who has been the reigning Jigsaw. So it very much then makes sense that this sleeper agent becomes fully activated and takes over the mantle. And then he's got his own two disciples who can help him because he is a man with one leg. He's
Yeah.
not going to have the strength of
He's
someone like Hoffman to collect victims. So he needs some, much like a cancer-ridden John, he needs somebody to go out and get these people for him.
right. Yeah. And what better than two young 20-year-old new guys like that? That's, perfect for that. Yeah, that's so disappointing. And especially because it does seem like as much as John was like, definitely wanting Hoffman to be his protege, he also was aware of Hoffman and probably could see the potential for Hoffman to go off and doing his own thing and going off book like that. And that's why he had that backup plan for Gordon the whole time.
Yeah. And it's obviously it's so how all these relationships between them all sort of work in. It's like originally you think that Amanda hasn't learned anything, and in Saw 3 she kills Lynn because of jealousy, but then we
Yeah.
find out in like one of the later films that actually it's because Hoffman has sent this letter saying that he knows that she was there the night that Jill lost her baby,
Right.
and he will tell John. And obviously Amanda doesn't want to lose her sort of like father figure's
Father
approval,
figure. Yeah.
so she's desperately trying to keep this secret, so that's why she does it. And it's like there's this sort of almost like really twisted brother sister dynamic between
Yeah.
Amanda and Hoffman, where they both want daddy's approval, but like the brother is just a bit more conniving. And I just would get I don't believe that Hoffman is aware of Gordon. You sort of see the surprise on his
Yeah.
face when, so it's these two are there squabbling, but meanwhile in the background there's this other guy waiting on standby. It's all very, I guess to some people it's convoluted, but I think it's quite exciting that there's all these like different factions and they've all got their different, like Amanda's traps are inescapable. Hoffman likes to watch. It's they've all got their like
Right.
different,
There's specialties and
yeah.
idiosyncrasies and stuff like that. Yeah, no, and I like that. And I also like that Jigsaw was playing it close to the vest. Like anytime he did have somebody else who was part of his game, he didn't always tell Amanda or Hoffman. He was very much playing lots of pieces and very much as a puzzle that we don't see the full picture yet. And I still feel like we don't have the full picture yet because there's still pieces left to be put into it.
Yeah, I agree. So this is probably one of my weaker of the series, but I still really enjoy it, and that ending
Yeah.
sort of like saves
Yeah.
it in a way. I find it hard to watch this one in the wake of Chester Bennington's passing,
Yeah.
especially because his trap is what I think. To me, it feels like one of the gnarlier ones. Like he's like super glued to
Oh yeah.
a
Okay. Yeah.
chair, and he has to like reach forwards to like free himself, like to like free the car, and then
Yeah.
all of his like gang. I mean, he's playing a neo-Nazi, so he's not a nice character. I'm not rooting for the character, but
Right.
it's just as a big like Linkin Park fan too. It was really exciting to see like, oh, Chester Bennington's in it, and I mean he's screaming in the film, but it kind of just
Yeah.
sounds like him singing on one of his songs. But to watch it in the wake of his passing, it's always just a little bit sad
Yeah.
to see. Um, and I also enjoy the trap with Bobby's friend Kale. He's like the blind guy who's like,
Yes.
he's in a room with little Floor, and he's got to be guided by Bobby. I don't know if it ever made it over to the States, but over here we had a children's game show in the 80s and 90s called Nightmare. Um,
Hmm.
and it would be like team of three kids, and one of them would go into, there was the dungeon master, and one of them would go into the dungeon, and the other two would basically watch them on screens and have to sort of like guide them through different scenarios. And they were always like on the run from a baddie, and if the baddie got them, then their game was over. But one of
Yeah.
the rooms, because it was all obviously like green screen and whatnot, but one of the
Yeah.
rooms, they had a helmet on and they couldn't see. And that one of the rooms was the floor kept changing like configuration, and like slabs kept falling. So their guides had to be like a step
Oh wow.
forwards, half a step to the left, half a step to the right. And whenever I watch that trap, I'm just instantly transported back to watching Nightmare as a kid, which was a lot of fun. So I do enjoy some of the traps in Seven, but
Yeah.
it is a slightly weaker film, I think.
Yeah. No, and I think part of that is because of the character of Bobby Dagan. Like it's for me anyway. I just like because ultimately you find out that he was not in any of the traps. He's just telling a story to make himself some money. And so then he's now put into a new or he's actually put into a trap now with all the people who are around him who helped facilitate that, his friend, his lawyer, his publicist, and all these, so he has to save each one of them, and at the end save his wife who doesn't know anything about this, and but along the way he actually has to do things that are going to hurt him, as well as hurting slash killing the people who were involved in it. And like I just didn't care. Like that's the major thing. Like normally I'm like, oh, I'm not super invested in any of it because obviously these are always terrible people. But like what he was doing wasn't really that bad. So it was just like, yeah, I get you're lying about it, but it's like, whatever. But um, but I just didn't care. That was part of it. And like as much as the traps were interesting and everything like that, I just thought the overall storyline with him was just kind of weak, and that was my only problem with it. But otherwise, like everything else was generally pretty good. I didn't really care for the cop that was pursuing them either. He just he didn't feel as strong as some of the other police in the series. So
Yeah, as I said earlier, he's very much almost the comic relief.
yeah,
He's he like he says like whoops, in an extreme circumstance. He's like, oh, whoopsie, my bad. And it's very much not the tone that we're used to see.
right,
There's always been humor in the Saw franchise, but in his
right,
character, it made it explicit, like, oh no, I'm the comedy, I'm the comedy cop.
yeah,
So yeah, he's not as strong as some of the other ones that have been presented throughout the series.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's not a bad movie. I don't think any of the Saw movies are bad. None of the
No,
ones that I've seen so far are bad in any way, shape, or form. Some are less than others, but they're all still interesting in their own ways, and they all have fun twists at the end that help give more to the story. And so, as as long as they keep doing that, I'm in for them all. So, um, but that leads us to Jigsaw, which was we finish out Saw the final chapter, and then 7 years later we get Jigsaw kind of out of the blue. We got a new movie, and this one tells a new story. Somebody else is continuing John's work, or is it John himself? And this in the story you're kind of confused. Although I will say, because of the way the stories have been in past installments, I saw it coming. I saw the
yeah,
exact twist coming before it came. I didn't necessarily. I had gotten spoiled as to who the person was that was doing it all. But and that's nobody's fault but mine because I hadn't watched the movie until now. So, but I thought this one was really good actually. I thought this was one of the stronger ones. I know a lot of people didn't like it, but I thought this was one of the stronger entries. What did you think of this one?
I don't mind Jigsaw. So in the gap between Saw 7 and Saw and Jigsaw, I started working for Lionsgate in the UK, which was like a dream because the Saw built Lionsgate, and I love
Yeah.
Saw, so getting to work for them. And then the irony sort of was that Jigsaw was just about to be released before I left the company to go and
Oh,
work somewhere else. I did get to see it early though. I got to go to an early staff screening because there was like me and two other people in the UK office that had any interest in horror, which given Lionsgate was built on horror is bizarre to me. But I like me and my friend were sent in because we were kind of like the Saw experts that worked there, and because of that I did twig the twist pretty early on, but I don't
yeah.
think that really spoils the enjoyment because it's like, well, I
No.
think it's this, and then like seeing it all fall into place, it's like, yeah, I think it, yeah, see, yeah, no, it definitely is. But it's interesting to be able to watch it from that eye. It's like when you're rewatching one of these films, knowing, you know, you're rewatching Sword, knowing that John's alive. He's just playing dead
Right.
in the middle of the bathroom. It's, you know, it's almost just as fun knowing where it's going to try and work out how it gets there and how it's going to misdirect you. But yeah, I have a lot of time for it. I think it tried to do something different, and it still managed to tie itself in. You know, everybody thought that, oh, this story is done, it's over, it's been dead for a few years, and yet they proved that there was still more left, and
Oh
it,
yeah.
it leaves a lot more questions as to, and presents another path for where the story can continue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that, I think there's still room for it, even if you didn't continue on with John's storyline in the way that this one does. I always feel like there's more to do in a lot of these franchises, but this one specifically of people who continue, even if they weren't involved in John's mission to begin with, they could then pick up his torch and continue on with it. So I always thought that's a fun avenue to go down, and that's kind of what this one does. Yes, you find out that this person was involved with Jigsaw, but also that but he was continuing the work for his own reasons as well. So um but yeah, I like the traps in this one. I like the group traps. Those are my favorite. You don't get those most of the movies. You usually get somebody trying to save a group of people, like in 6 and 7. um I think 3 and 4 are the same as well. You always got somebody walking through trying to save people, trying to stop traps from happening, and rather than the group ones where everybody's got to either work together or you people are going to die along the way, which is always what happens because never anybody, no, none of these groups can ever put aside their crap to actually work together. But I do. These are the ones I enjoy the most. The group ones.
Yeah, it's like the group in two are just terrible.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
none of them were prepared to listen to each other. The group in five, obviously, the group in two, Jigsaw isn't particularly well known. It's only Amanda who's telling them about
Right.
Jigsaw. But by five, everybody knows about Jigsaw. They think he's dead, but everybody knows about Jigsaw. So that group is a lot more pragmatic, and they do say, well, what do you do? Where do you work? How do you know this? They still inevitably miss the point of their trial being to put aside their differences and work together.
Right.
But they show a progression. And obviously, this group is much earlier in the timeline. So
Yes.
we kind of get a mix of 2 and 3. So you've got some characters that like aren't prepared to work together, and then you've got like Anna, who is, trying to find a way for them from all to survive. But yeah, it's always interesting when you put different personalities into a extreme situation and see how they work.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I liked it because it did, it it always feels like they're always going to kind of do this, is that he had so many different games going on that you never know when another one's going to be found out later. Um and so that's what's fun about it, is because this one, like they present it in the film like it's going concurrently with the modern story that's going on, but obviously, as you find out towards the end, that no, this happened already a long time ago, um in fact 10 years ago. And whereas the like it's similar to what happened in number 2, where the group that was on the camera you thought was happening at the same time, that had already happened earlier that day or whatever like that. So it was a different timeline, but it was, I like that he does this kind of thing where I like the stories where they do that, where they kind of mess with you and make you think, oh, this stuff's happening all at the same time. Especially because this guy specifically um was staging new kills to look like the stuff that was happening in the game itself, that you're
Yeah,
seeing on screen. So that made it
yeah,
a nice little misdirection.
yeah. Because like I said, I twigged quite early on that
Yeah.
I think it was when they started going on about 10 years ago, and I was like, I bet this is in the past. I think it was because none of them mentioned Jigsaw. I thought,
Yeah.
well, but then the bodies started turning up, and I was like, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they haven't gone with that. But then you're right, that is the whole point. He is feeding in these victims so that it appears as though this trap is still happening.
The one that, like, so I had already kind of suspected that it was happening, but when they find the body in the barn that's all shredded, I was like, or not in the barn, but in her studio, that was shredded. And I was like, how did he already pull the body out while they're still in that room? There's no way. There's no way that timeline works. I was like, this has to have already happened like a long time ago. So yeah, that was that was what clued me in on that one. So it confirmed my suspicions as to what was going on.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
I do question with that trap in particular, the motorbike corkscrew
yeah,
thing. I do question why they didn't call this one Spiral, and why they why they
right.
called the next one Spiral, because that's kind of like the big trap in a way of this
Yeah,
one, with the big extravagant death. And yeah, he basically gets like spiralized like a courgette.
yeah,
It's the fact that they didn't sort of see that and go, yeah, Spiral would be like a new way. But obviously they wanted to, go with, Jigsaw, to be like, no,
yeah.
this is still John's story.
Right. Well, and I love too that they did this misdirect for the audience as well too, because during the whole process of these traps, then John himself shows up right at the same time that they exhume his grave, and he's not in his casket. And so you're like, oh my God, is he really actually alive? Did he somehow, after all the evidence that we've seen, not only beat the cancer, but, beat having his throat cut?
Yeah,
Is like, has this now become supernatural in some way? So, which it was like, obviously not. Anybody who watches this stuff knows that, like, it's not going to be that the case. It's fun, don't get me wrong, but it's not going to be the case. So, but it was a great way bringing Tobin Bell back to the franchise, and because it's great having him back in every installment like this.
And I just like how when you go through the series and you track the timeline back, that for his earlier trials, he was just him. He didn't care
Yeah.
if these people saw him and saw his face.
Right.
Obviously, at some point, something happened. Maybe it's when the cancer started to take hold of him more. That's
Right.
when he started implementing the video and stuff. But for the first trap where he gets the drug addict who is responsible for the loss of their child, it's just him in his workshop and the sky. Yeah, he's there, and again in this one he's there, but I guess those ones are both very personal to him. You see, in the first one, it's the guy that was responsible for Jill losing the baby, and then in this one, it's the man responsible for the death of his nephew. It's his
Yeah.
neighbor. It's like when it's personal, he gets full on. And same,
Make sure to
in
show his
Saw,
face. Yeah.
yeah, like even obviously in Saw, he is in the room with Gordon, who he obviously
Yeah.
blames for a lot of things. So I think it's quite interesting to sort of track it through and be like, so at what point did he decide that he needed like a symbol? At what point did he become Batman? What point did that happen?
Well, but at the same time, though, he is using the Billy puppet throughout the trial beforehand. So before he reveals himself to the last two,
That's
then
true.
you know, he is keeping it kind of under wraps for a bit. Just, but I think that's more psychological than anything else. It's just
Mm.
like you don't know who it is for the longest time, and then at that key moment is when he comes in and reveals that yeah, it's been me all along, suckers. And so, but I like that aspect. There was something else. Um, but yeah, I think that. Oh, I like that this one, while it definitely feels part of the Saw franchise, and it does. This one also is one that it's not desaturated like the other ones. It's not got that
Yeah.
green haze to it. The filter that they put on all the previous movies. So this one feels like it's more outdoors at times. You get a lot more outdoor aspects, more daylight, and more. Um, they obviously were going for more um, modern look for it, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, and the trial itself is happening in a barn and not
Yeah,
some underground bunker
yeah,
in
yeah.
like Saw
Some
City. It's
industrial, yeah, some industrial warehouse. Yeah,
Yeah, because I say I watched 437 back to back, and then going out into daylight to collect my daughter, it was like, but where's the green? I've become so used to like, green and grime, and yeah, Jigsaw is a lot sort of slicker, and yeah,
yeah,
there's the bit with the people in the pot. It's because I know that Ariel, who's a regular guest, she has this
yes.
whole like Saw City sort of like
Saw City.
map,
Yep.
yeah, like map planned out, and all we really
Interesting.
see for the first seven films is a warehouse, and
Yeah.
factory, facility and stuff, and suddenly 10 years later there's parks and there's
Your
baseball
rooftops. Yeah.
pitches. Yeah, there's the tops of these industrial buildings, there's a barn, there's a farm, there's nature. So I think it sort of opens it up quite nicely and makes it feel like a more realistic world. I feel like the first
Right.
seven, it's very much its own Saw City, but by like Jigsaw, it kind of opens it up to, well, yeah, this could be any city.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. That's what I liked about it too. Is just it modernized things. Things weren't quite as you know like because with the first seven, because of the very nature of the timeline and stuff like that, they had to keep it pretty tight. But partway through that, technology had advanced to like
Yeah,
smartphones and stuff like that. So they're still having to use flip phones and everything, and it just felt a little off. um but it wasn't bad. I mean, obviously they were trying to keep the timeline tight, but then you get into Jigsaw, and now it's just like things seem a little bit more modern and a little bit brighter, and it gave it a nice, unique version to add to the whole overall. But it still very much feels like a Saw movie. Nothing seems out of place in what they're doing either. So that part of it's good.
Yeah, it's the moment where on the body they find the like SD card USB
Yeah.
thing. It's like, we're not, we're not in the past anymore. It's not a
Yeah.
dictaphone cassette tape. It's, oh my God, like we've had an upgrade. Yeah, it's a nice little thing for like people who have stuck with this series. It's a
Right.
nice like little like, oh yeah, he's gone digital now.
Well, and that was what was funny too, because then all of a sudden we're back to the tape players on like in the trap section. And so I was just like, okay, well, he's still using those. I mean, he could be using little digital recorders now. And then but then like at the same time though, the TV screen underneath the floor there and the one that was in the silo were like flat screens instead of like CRT monitors. And so that felt a little off in terms of timeline. And that kind of messed me up too. I was like, well, is this really the right time period? Like, so it was a little bit confusing for sure with keeping to the thing. And very much they were doing that on purpose to kind of mess with your perspective on when things were.
Yeah, and I really enjoy the cast in this one.
Yeah.
She only has a relatively small part, but Brittany Allen, I think, is great as Carly, as the thief who ends up with
Yeah.
the needle, another needle trap.
Yeah. Yeah.
This franchise on needles are just terrifying because it's one of them is a placebo, one of them is like a saline solution, one of them is acid, and one of them's the
Yeah.
antidote. And they've got a 1 in 3 thing, and they just panic. They don't look at the. You can tell that people in this world don't do escape rooms very often,
Right.
because they're just like, oh, I don't know, like I'll just like eeny meeny miny mo that one. Um, but I think Brittany Allen is a fantastic actor. She's in, I can't quite remember the name. It's a really long title, but she's in a zombie film where she is just one woman being stalked across the desert by zombies, and she's really good in that. And then she's also in a film with another Jigsaw actress, Hannah Emily Anderson, who plays Eleanor, the assistant mortician.
Okay.
They are in a film called What Keeps You Alive, which is this really taut queer thriller about this same-sex couple who go away to a cabin in the woods for the weekend, and their relationship just disintegrates, but in like a really interesting way. So when I saw her pop up in Jigsaw, I was like, oh, okay. And she's only in it, like I say, very briefly, but I think she gives a great turn for somebody who, in the world of Saw, isn't in it for that long.
Right. Yeah, no, I think she does a good job. I really do like Hannah Anderson as Eleanor. Um, she does a really good job in that, being somebody who, you kind of are suspicious of because she appreciates what John Kramer did with his traps. She's obviously, you as a person, as a like the person that she is, the character that she is, that she can appreciate that, but understands that they're wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, but she appreciates the beauty in the designs. So I think it's an interesting character to kind of play that nuance on, and that's hard. So I think she does it really well.
Yeah. And you know that the people behind Saw, the people behind Scream, watched this and went, because
Yeah.
Eleanor obviously has like a Jigsaw museum. And
Yes.
that
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
obviously what inevitably ends up happening in Scream 6 is, oh look, we've got
Yeah.
all these artifacts. And I mean, I refuse to believe that both of these films had this idea independently of one another, given
Yeah.
that one of them was already out in the world for a number of years. I definitely think they
Yeah.
sort of saw that, went, oh yeah, no, that might be an interesting direction. Um,
Exactly.
but also Laura Vandervoort
Yes.
is really good in this. I mean, she's obviously best known for playing Supergirl in
Supergirl on
Smallville.
Smallville. Yep.
She was in a werewolf TV show called Bitten, and she was in the Soska Sisters remake of Rabid. But I really like the character of Anna in Jigsaw. She's a very complicated woman, and as much as
Yeah.
you might see the twist coming with the time that where we are in time, her character twist is just horrific. And
Oh, it's
like,
yeah.
even back then when I didn't have children and didn't necessarily see myself having a child at any point in the near future, that is just brutal. And because we're
Oh,
we're
very
not
much.
we're not afforded female villains too often. And it's very interesting that for the whole of Jigsaw, you're kind of rooting for her. She seems to be the only one in the
Yeah.
group that's really got her head screwed on, and she's the one trying to get them to work together and get through this and survive this. And you buy into her, like, well, yeah, well, why is she here? Like, it doesn't. Okay, she let
Right.
her marriage collapse. And then when the truth behind her character, and she's basically made her husband think that he was responsible for the death of their child when in fact it was her. It's just so cold and cruel, and you don't see it coming. And that is what this franchise is so good at. Like, even
Yeah.
if you see one twist coming, there'll be something else that gets you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and I think that was the interesting bit about it too, was the twist of who was behind it all, as well, because as much as you could suspect who it was, and I don't think it was very difficult to suspect who it was, because while they were throwing red herrings at you, obviously the red herrings were, seemed kind of obvious that it wasn't them, like Eleanor or the cop. They just, like, it was too easy to pin it on them. So, I mean, at the very least, I would think that, obviously the guy who it was, Logan, he was the one. It just, his reasonings behind it. That's what's always interesting too, is because it kind of is always the one you suspect least, and then, but you need to know their reasons behind it, and they always have interesting reasons. It might not be great reasons, but they're interesting reasons. So I thought his was pretty good.
Yeah, he's an interesting character, and when obviously it reveals all of like the truth behind him and how he interconnects again, it makes sense. This series
Right.
just manages to work itself in, because, and I think this is what I was mentioning earlier, where I kind of went down like a rabbit hole with my husband. Was he was like, well, how was he involved? Like, how would that work? Because we've heard nothing about him. And it's like, well, no, it does still work, because like, this is an early Jigsaw trap, and
Right.
he see John brings him out of the trial after the first room, because he suddenly realizes that this person shouldn't be in there, and it's teaching John that he shouldn't be doing this for vengeance.
Right.
He needs to have more valid reasons. So like, without Logan, there is no Jigsaw as we go on to know him, because there's no one to give him that like epiphany. So
Balance.
it
Yeah.
does
To keep it
work.
about
And then,
justice.
yeah, and then my husband was like, yeah, but like, then what happens to him? It's like, well, again, he's kind of like Gordon. He's just another sleeper agent
Yeah.
who is kind of, he's come out, and he's he's helped John when he's needed it, but he's also got like his own kid to be looking after. So
Yeah.
he's doing that. And I feel like he saw the change that John was doing, and he was happy with that. And obviously the legacy of Jigsaw and John Kramer did have an effect on the city for a number of years after. But then it's when he sees the corruption and stuff start to filter back in, that's when he feels like it's his time to get back involved again. So it does make sense.
Well, yeah, and then the death of his wife, and then the cop letting that the killer go because he was a good informant, and rather than doing again, it was about justice, and so it was like you didn't do what you were supposed to do, so I'm going to make sure that you can't do this anymore. Um, and it was good. I mean, you might quibble, and I don't agree with their methods and everything like that, but I can understand their motivations, which is always good for this franchise. But yeah, no, I think that it's this is a fun movie. I like that they updated that you get the little the laser collar thing, which was fun. um I thought it was cute the way he like faked his and then the cop didn't realize it
Yeah.
until just till just there at the end. And it was too late by that point.
Yeah.
But
And the whole sort of like splayed head
yeah.
is is definitely like an image that like stays with you. We've never seen anything quite
No,
like
yeah.
that in this series. Yeah, we've seen Strom getting crushed by walls and bones breaking.
Yeah.
We've seen people like hacking parts of themselves off, but we've never seen something like lasers inverting and caught it. Yeah, it's just. I mean, I'm not quite sure that that's quite what would happen, like from
No, yeah.
a biological sort of way, but it looks like fun in the context of a horror film, which is what
Yeah,
you want from these things.
absolutely. Yeah, no, it's definitely a great moment, and just highlights some good digital work, in a franchise that's largely been fairly good about the practical effects as well. And even this movie itself was very good with most of the practical effects and everything. So it was nice to see a little bit of digital fun there that didn't look bad.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things to me about this film being set 10 years later is that it is John who is associated with Jigsaw, because whilst the audience know about Amanda and Hoffman and Gordon, no, they were never officially found, like found out and
Right.
revealed, and kind of like to anybody who they were revealed to, they were later put into some saw trap or killed off. It's like obviously
Right. Yeah.
when Hoffman in 6 realizes that when his voice gets revealed during the digital like scrubbing down to get to the original voice recording, he
Right.
shoots the 3 people in the room. And as far as he's aware, they're the only 3 people that know. He's told that more people know, but he thinks that's a trick. And I think
Yeah.
Jigsaw corroborates that. So I kind of it's interesting that they all, in their own way, wanted to be Jigsaw and the mantle of Jigsaw to have their legacy and to be remembered, to be immortal, as a lot of serial killers kind of like that infamy is the way to live forever.
Right.
And yet in reality, it's John Kramer, the Jigsaw killer.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
that's the way he's spoken about. It's not Jigsaw, it is John Kramer, aka the Jigsaw killer. And so it's like all that hard work that Hoffman put in,
Right.
was all for nothing. And it's quite interesting to me that, because I think the first time I watched it, it's like, why is nobody talking about like Hoffman and Amanda and that? And it's like, well, actually, kind of everybody that knew about their involvement isn't around anymore.
Yeah.
So it would, it makes sense that, yeah, John does get to be this immortal person on his own.
Right. And I think that's what's a large part of why that this franchise is fun, is because even though it is other people who are involved in it carrying on his legacy and everything, that he still gets all the credit for it, no matter when these killings are happening or whatever. It's like as soon as the killings start up again, it's like, oh my god, how can he be back, and so it's like, well, he can't be, obviously there's somebody else doing it, and that makes it so much more fun that he keeps getting, like, it's literally just him the entire time. And and it's not based on anything supernatural. It's not like he really came back from the dead, so it's that does make it a lot of fun in terms of continuing the storyline into the future.
And I also like how this one finally addresses John's love of pigs. So this is happening. The barn is actually the Tuck pig farm, which is from Jill's
Yeah.
family. And when he has Anna and Ryan at the end, he's explaining how like pigs are those beautiful, sensitive creatures. They respond to the emotions of other of other animals and even humans. Because
Right.
I've always we always understood that Billy the puppet has sentimental reasons. It was going to be a toy for his son Gideon, and it's sort of like a way to have his son around in a twisted way. But the pig
Right.
mask has never really made sense to me. Like, well, how does a pig correlate to this? And in this one, we find out that John just really liked pigs. And, I get it. If I was to become a jigsaw, I would probably have my disciples like wearing raccoon masks or cat masks. So I get it. It was nice. It was nice to, like, at least in some way, for them to try and acknowledge like how he settled on a pig mask.
Yeah. Well, but they kind of did that in an earlier installment too, where he was going after Hoffman in that market or whatever, and he grabbed the pig mask. But that was kind of like a throwaway. It was just to go, oh yeah, that's why he does the pig mask now. He just, that other one was kind of cartoonish, and he decided to go for a more realistic one. But it does, yeah. I like how they add the better wrinkle that the reason why he was drawn to the pig mask was because of his love of pigs. So that a nice, again, it's always great when we get little additions to the overall story like this. So, but yeah, that's all I have on these movies. Is there anything that you wanted to mention that we didn't talk about yet?
No, that sort of covers off most of them. Like I say, it's a sequel prequel that works
Yeah.
really. It's both a sequel and a prequel and an attempt at a reboot. So I think it all works together
Yeah.
like really, really nicely.
Yeah, no, I think it worked really well. I know that I guess at the time people didn't really appreciate it as much. And it's since, I think, some people have come back around on it a little bit more. Um but I think that, I think it works well within all of it. Um and next we got Spiral, which I know this one, Spiral, goes off in a different direction, not in a different direction, but you know it doesn't associate as much with John Kramer, and so that, I know that that one itself is pretty divisive. um,
Yeah. I
and
think people
so
had a problem. Yeah, I think people had a problem with Jigsaw until they saw Spiral, and those people were
yeah,
like,
yeah,
"Oh no,
yeah,
like Jigsaw's fine." And I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem with Spiral. But I watched it very much as this is. I mean, it's Spiral, the Book of Saw. It's not
yes,
meant to be a continuation of John Kramer's story. John
Right.
Kramer had his, he had his like 8 films. Now we're going to try and like kickstart it in a different direction with
Right.
different things. I do struggle with Chris Rock in it, just because I know him more for his comedy, and
Right.
it's just
Yeah.
like too much of a tonal jar for my brain to understand. It's like when I hear certain actors who I know for like playing an American character or something suddenly start speaking with a Cockney accent. I'm like, my head, no, go back to talking how you're supposed to talk. But yeah, I see I see where people are coming from, but I also just think when you compare it to other horror franchises, there is not anywhere near as much consistency in terms of quality and narrative
Yeah.
as in the Saw series. So even if it's you feel like it's quite lackluster compared to some of the others in the series, it still has its strong points and connects. Whereas some of the other franchises, it might just be, oh, I liked that death in that Friday the 13th film. But
Yeah,
other
exactly.
than that, I liked that they were on a boat going to Manhattan. I liked that there was toxic waste. But there's not really much more that you can get from those films. Where with in Saw,
Right.
even if you're not wowed by it, you can't argue with the quality and
Right.
the narrative consistency.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that the this is one of the most consistent franchises in horror. And they're looks like they're gonna keep going with that. So it's awesome. That's all I got. If you want to let people know where they can find you online.
Yes, so I am on Blue Sky at cathughes.bsky.social and across Letterboxd, Instagram, and Twitter X, whatever its name is. I am at Gizmo Shikari, and there are link trees everywhere to my work. And I've got a couple of things coming out for the Arrow blog in the near future, as well as essays in the second site releases of It Follows and Ginger Snaps.
Awesome. Very cool. Second site releases are very good too. So you can get them because they're very cool. So
So good. The Ginger Snaps one was only recently announced, but
yeah.
I wrote it August 2022, and
Oh wow.
I've just had to sit and like not tell anybody outside of like my immediate family that this is happening, because obviously they
That's
don't
crazy.
want the news of the release. And I've like seen people being like, oh my God, I'd love like a Ginger Snaps Blu-ray. And it's like,
Yeah.
so it's nice to like finally have it out in the world, that, and it's not just, I mean, this is how sort of like secret squirrel they are. I thought it was just Ginger Snaps that they were releasing, but they're actually
It's
releasing the
all
trilogy.
three. Yeah.
So like even me as somebody who was involved with the release, I didn't know it was going to be all three, and I'm so excited to get a copy because of the fact that, like with Saw, I think that the Ginger Snaps trilogy is a really solid trilogy that all
Oh yeah.
works. The fact that you've got the same actors coming back, and you've got your original, you've got your sequel, which makes sense, and then you've got your prequel where they go like properly back in time, sort of like Evil Dead and stuff. It's a really tight trilogy, and the fact that they're all going to be released is just so exciting.
That's awesome. That's very cool. Yeah, it looks like a good set. So yeah, anybody who can grab that, I know that some places will be able to sell it here in the States as well. So um, that'll be really cool. All right. Well, I appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, always. It's always a good time having you on. And I'm sure you'll be back pretty soon.
Yes, definitely.
Thanks again to Kat for joining me. On Friday, Ashley Thomas returns to talk about Thor Ragnarok, and on Monday, Katrina returns to complete my Saw series with Spiral and Saw X. And it's also my second anniversary episode. So make sure to be here for that. Thanks for listening. Creepy and Geeky is a part of the Morbidly Beautiful podcast network. Please check out morbidlybeautiful.com/podcasts for more great shows. If you like what you've heard, please consider giving the show 5 stars and a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Also, please share the podcast on social media to help spread the word. Make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app or at creepyandgeeky.com. Music for the podcast is Gratitude, composed by Jerry Smith. You can follow the podcast on social media at Creepy and Geeky on both Twitter and Instagram. If you'd like to follow me, I'm Geek Thulu on Twitter and Blue Sky, and geek.thulu on Instagram. You can support the podcast by ordering teas and more on TeePublic or by donating to the coffee page. All of the links are in the show notes. Finally, don't forget, stay creepy.